Yeah, the test flight approach is good. The screenshots and videos in a pull request is an awesome approach. I will say that you can't really implement a design system for 200 apps, but if you're working on an app for a brand, that brand has design language. So even like spinning up a quick enum with color this, color that, and using that everywhere is much better than copy-pasting everywhere. You don't have to go as far as semantic coloring on that stuff, but there are knowledge you can pass around.
No, absolutely. Plus, the only thing you actually need to change is the colors, because if you actually set up your design system in a way to have corner radius for a button, corner radius for a card, text for a title, etc., this is the biggest chunk of the work to do it the first time. But once that is set up, you can just take it, put it in another app, change the base, like the foundation color, foundation font, and you have a new app.
So, back in here, first time I think hosting a roundtable live with so many people. We will try to improvise today. We have here Shai Mishali, Firas, Valeria, Zamzam, and Hidde. Hidde, without the N, okay? So today we're going to try to discuss again about design, but in a more practical perspective, starting from that awkward moment when you receive the design from the team and you have to kind of implement it and put it inside your app. Firas and Valeria already spoiled us a little bit with their implementation, but I wanted to discuss with you guys, ladies, how is your experience with that, and what are the most common pitfalls and how can I say, problems you get when you are in that spot. So you are fighting with the designers and you have to translate the Figma or the Zeppelin or the whatever sketch into your code. So who wants to start? It's... Or if you want to just share stories and funny things about maybe elevators, so we can keep on...
Yes, elevator jokes. Hi, everyone. I guess, first of all, I think that designers and developers should be friends as much as possible. I think the first problem with any kind of two professionals is communication. Designer might not necessarily know the technical limitations that we face when we get a very pretty and polished up design. A designer might have designed for web for a few years and then switched to mobile, and they don't necessarily know the practices. So I jokingly said that the first thing to do with a new designer is send them to the Human Interface Guidelines by Apple, but it's kind of only half jokingly. Think that both sides should try and understand the communication of the other side. That means that if you're a developer, you need to figure out what's the tooling on the other side. You need to understand Figma, understand how it works, what are the limitations. And if you're a designer, maybe you should try and understand the limitations, technically speaking, on the other side, and then things usually go much smoother. And if there's a hiccup, then just try and learn from it and not do it the next time on either side. That's my experience, at least.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Shai said. A lot of problems usually happen exactly when developers are not aware of how the software they're using, because even if you're not designing on Figma, you're still using Figma, for example, or Sketch, or whatever the software might be. So it would be nice if you get familiar with it, with the basics, and so on and so forth, and same for designers. Because a lot of times, you can be understaffed, or just policies of the company can influence how you work, and the thing is, you might end up having to develop for Android and iOS, and not knowing the differences of how, because as we said, an important aspect of design is just being familiar with it without having to, whenever you download an app, you already know 90% of what you need to do, just because if they use the same accepted concepts, it's just going to be so familiar for you, and it's going to push people to use it. So just like code and design, you don't reinvent the wheel. So the thing is, like, if you have to get familiar with iOS, with Android, understand how a pop-up is presented on one, on the other, even the order of the buttons, all these kind of things. And it's your duty as a engineer to point that out to the developer during design reviews, because like obviously they have their own things to study as well, so they might not be super familiar with everything. And it just shows ownership. If you're working on your code base, I'm assuming you're proud of what you're doing. So you should show ownership by discussing with designers when something you don't feel is right or doesn't fit what Apple requires you to do, and so on and so forth. Unless you want your app to get rejected, or I mean, it's going to get either way. But
I found that the best way to work with developers is actually, side by side. Well, is that like I'm saying, something new? Yeah, side by side. But what does it mean? In Telepass, we did something last year that was really unique. Never happened again. We designed a new service, and what we did was create a new component, a time picker that rotates, similar like the one in the what?
Android.
Not the Android, like we have in the oh my god. Yeah, the iOS.
The time picker?
Yeah, the time, no, not the time picker. I'm sorry, I'm I'm rambling. No, the time picker that we have on the alarm app. Yeah, I'm sorry. My brain was just so. Yeah, and it was new to us, and it was an easy task from a development point of view and from a design point of view. But what we did was we designed it together, and we tested it together with actually with colleagues. But it was really, really amazing how we collaborated from the beginning to the end of the creation of this component, so that the design was what I had in mind and what the user, what was really usable, because we did 2 or 3 iterations because there were some actual usability issues. And also, I was certain as a designer that what I was doing was doable, was actually, we could actually present that to a user. So that was, I think, you need time to do that, and you need, of course, preparation in your timeline of a project.
How long did it take?
It took actually, I think, 2 or 3 months. Because, yeah. But we were doing this as I won't say as a side project, but we were doing it. We were like a pirate team. We just decided we're going to do this, and we did that, and it was really awesome, and it really worked. And another thing I think that is really useful, another method, is the hot potato. So a designer does something really, really small, passes to the developer, it gets developed, and then the designer goes back to it and adds something else, and that's so on. So it's really back and forth, really, really, really fast. And so that's another way to ensure that design and development are aligned, and everything that we design is feasible. It's doable in actual development.
I have one.
We have a mic.
So, is it okay? Yeah, okay. So I think I agree with almost everything that you guys said, but what I really think is that from a developer perspective, when I work with designers, they really look forward to hear our feedback. So they don't want to just hand over the design and say, go and build it and come back when it's done. Whereas it has to be, as you said, like a recursive sort of communication, that they hand over the design, you look at it and say, okay, this looks good, but this one, actually maybe could you tweak it a bit?
Yeah, like a
because
feedback loop. In a
yeah,
way,
exactly. Because then it would make it a very collaborative way of finding the solution that actually works well with the design guidelines, and also it's not insanely difficult to build as a developer. So I think that that has really helped. Another thing which I'm really working with our design team right now is to have guidelines. So stick to build a design system, because it will help the design team. It will also help us, because then we wouldn't end up creating a new color every time. Oh, now we have gray 15 because there's just tiny bit different. Whereas if you have your main colors, your main component, then you can just use them around, which that makes the design work faster, and it also makes the develop work faster.
Right. So I agree on the communication part, that's 100% true, but I do think the execution side of things is going to change drastically, especially for iOS, thanks to SwiftUI. Because even 6 years ago, prototypes became more of a thing in design. Framer came along, which was CoffeeScript, horrible language. But the UI of Framer is pretty much the same as SwiftUI previews is today. So I think in combination with something like ChatGPT, I think designers can actually get a working prototype, but the difference now is that the working prototype can actually be somewhat implemented. Yes, it wouldn't be the nicest code ever, but you can get it on an actual device, and you can implement it for V1. So I think the communication part will be more revolving around the problem solving. What problem are we trying to solve? Because in the end, the developer and the designer want the same outcome, the best solution possible for problem X or Y. But I do think the power of SwiftUI in the last few years already shows like how fast-paced you can get something in the App Store, and I think that's exciting times for. And I think it also will melt the designs versus developer a bit more than it ever was before.
That reminded me of two things. So with SwiftUI, and I'll also refer to Jetpack Compose, basically declarative UI, right? The notion of trying to get pixel perfect designs, it's, I want to say dead, but let's say dying, just to be politically correct here. Like, it's not reasonable to want pixel perfectness because we have, like, it was mentioned in the talk, I think, by Marin today, so many screen sizes and so many densities and dynamic type and everything. It's just not reasonable at this point in the amount of devices and the fact that we no longer say, okay, now set the border to this color. No, we declare the UI as a function of our state, and everything is different in that sense. Now things like our designers also need to understand that this is the way these things work now, that things stretch and things, try to fit on the screen, whatever the screen size is. If it's a tvOS device or it's a watchOS device or it's an iPhone, that's one thing. And the second thing that you said, I really connected this. So we did a POC at the company where we had a few designers try to learn SwiftUI. And I think that's going to be like the next generation of modern mobile teams, because for a designer to sketch something in Figma and then just write, rectangle and put this and then a text field, it's not that far like we think it is, and using stuff like ChatGPT and generative AI is going to really affect our possibility to do this. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, design and development, at least in the prototyping stage, is going to become a singular thing at some point. Not just for, budget reasons, but just because it kind of makes sense and it increases the ownerships of all sides. So. Yeah.
It's also great because then the designer doesn't have to bother the developer anymore. Like, it needs to be 10 points to the left or the right, they can do it themselves.
And usually for developers, it's sometimes, in my experience, I've seen that it's hard to pay attention to the pixel perfection. Not in a sense that you have to take the Figma or whatever and the app. I've seen people with a ruler trying to measure pixels.
Guilty.
To get started on that.
But is the ruler pixel perfect? That's the problem.
Yeah,
maybe.
that's of course the problem. But sometimes maybe developers are not trained to pay attention to the design. What's your experience? Is it something that working with people you found out a lot? Many times I've seen, I don't know, the margins placed randomly or the spacing between items not coherent, like you said in your, is it something that happens to me only in projects that I'm inheriting, or is something that also
Well,
you've seen?
I mean,
Am I alone in this?
no, I mean, the thing is, obviously all make mistakes. I just think as an iOS engineer, like you're a front-end facing engineer, it should be part of your responsibility to care for the design you're making, because you're not just making an API, you're showcasing your work. So if I think it's bad engineering practices not to be interested in something so core to your work. So you should be. I'm not saying you should be able to design a full-fledged app, but caring about those details, even if maybe I don't know, like just some color that was not properly matched, or like the status bar is dark on a dark background. Like pay attention to these things. It should be so important. And something that helps with all those problems is obviously like making the design team part of the code review. So whenever you work on a feature that is design heavy and you open the pull request, inside of that pull request, like include screenshots, video in case of animations inside that pull request, share it with your designer and have it part of your definition of done before merging that pull request. That will help a lot, especially like with QA, and all the pipeline, to be honest, because you'll find errors more often, frequently, and easier to fix, rather than having to wait a month, two in, and you're about to release, it goes to QA, and you just find all type of UI errors.
I think one thing I still do it sometimes with our designer is that when I have something final, is that we sit together, and it doesn't have to be a very long session, and then we go through the design, and then there are tiny things that it's not that like I don't care, but I just don't see them like as an engineer. It's just like, and then she goes, oh, like here you missed a corner over here, or it's like the pixels here doesn't fit exactly, and those things are very easy to just sit down and fix it afterwards. So it's like a design kind of review, but then we sit down together and do it, and then they all have access to our test flight. So every time like I'll tell her, okay, I implement this, maybe check it out and give me your feedback. So that worked very well for me as well.
The way to solve these problems is using tokens, so I'm just saying.
There was a discussion about design systems, so that's like a huge, yeah. Just saying that there was a talk about design systems, and like it's a really hard thing to do. Stefano probably remembers I did a talk about it like 4 years ago in the different venue of Swift Heroes, because it's not about that first time. It's about how do you keep it maintained, how do you keep people using it, and not just putting RGB colors by hand and copy-pasting them everywhere, or doing font size 14 by hand and not respecting dynamic type. So those things are part of creating some sort of framework, not like a library framework, like a way of thinking about UI that we want to reuse as much of the knowledge that we have in our team, both colors, both design. So for example, these rounded corner things, maybe we want to have a reusable component that already takes into account the rounded corners, then we have to review this problem once. You don't have to go back every time. But yeah, keeping it maintained is a big tool as well. Some teams have, some companies have an entirely dedicated team for that problem.
I also think that, and it's something that every conference I attend about this, it's something that comes out every time. There are people like you working on a single product because you're maybe working for a product company, and people like me and probably, hopefully, not hopefully, but probably many others working at agencies, duplicating or dealing with different projects. In those cases, having a design system is not an option, meaning that probably you are inheriting the designs from somebody else. For those cases, I don't know if you have experience in this company work, but how would you review that a design, of course, without trying the app, is there anything that you've experienced for a pull request point of view? Given that storyboards are in the past and we can forget about those things.
Yeah, the test flight approach is good. The screenshots in videos in a pull request is an awesome approach. We use that as well. I will say that you can't really implement a design system for 200 apps, but if you're working on an app for a brand, that brand has design language. So even like spinning up a quick enum with color this, color that, and using that everywhere is much better than copy pasting everywhere. You don't have to go as far as semantic coloring on that stuff, but there are basic knowledge you can pass around.
No, absolutely. Plus, like, the thing is, like, if you do the design, even if you have 20 apps, 20 brands, 20 whatever, if you do the design system properly, again, not to point out tokens, but you properly do it, the only thing you actually need to change is the colors. Because if you actually set up your design system in a way to have corner radius for a button, corner radius for a card, text for a title, etc. Exactly, just like you have all the semantics. This is the biggest chunk of the work to do it the first time, but once that is set up, you can just take it, put it in another app, change the base, like the foundation, the color, foundation font, and you have a new app. So.
I can add something, or if you want to. The thing is that it's fine, but one of the weirdest bugs that happened me, I think a couple of weeks ago, probably last week, was that I missed a separator. You missed the separator. What separator? And there was a light gray separator of 1 pixel in a design with a white background.
Crucial.
First of all, I mean, why?
It's crucial.
You remember his opening slide, Hidde with a very light color. It was lighter than that. In those cases, probably I wouldn't missed it in the tokens as well, because it wasn't seeable. Of course, it was probably not the best choice in terms of design. I'm not a designer, but probably.
But again, that comes back to the design itself, because, like, again, a table view, I'm assuming all the table views inside of your application should look the same. So there I would ask you, how did you implement your table? Why are you redoing a table view every time?
I stopped
and you don't
with
have
table view, I think, 8 years ago.
I'm saying like in that case, I would be, why aren't you using like a centralized table view that you just feed it a different data source and a different type of cell and it just updates? Like,
because you didn't see the design.
One thing about this is that different screens have different color profiles. Could be a pain point. So when you say it might have been a poor design choice, no, maybe the designer screen has a fancy Dell that's calibrated in a specific, profile, and then when I'll give an example. Happens every time. We have a group meeting, and someone shows a design on Zoom, and we all watch it on the big TV, and you're like, there should be like a gray background here, but you're not seeing it because the screen isn't calibrated, and you can't even see the screen because it's so light. But on an iPhone, you would see it. So we should still try and notice those. Yeah, iPhones, freaking iPhones.
Yeah, one piece of advice for design, at least the first time, use the Mac screen, the laptop screen, probably.
So only buy really good screens.
Or use a mirror so you see it on the device and you can, make a mistake.
Yeah. Does Figma support it? I remember some... No, the direct mirror. I remember Sketch having a separated
Yeah,
out.
Figma has a mirror, so it's super easy.
Also, Figma has auto layout support, which I recently. Figma has auto layout support, so we can ask the designer to actually make if you're supporting like different platforms, or if you have separate needs for iPad, then you can just ask them to put it for you. Then you can just switch to, like, for instance, iPhone SE, and then you will see how the component will change according to the size of the frame, which is super neat in some cases.
Yeah.
Has any of you ever used the auto-generated code from Figma? Because sometimes...
Actually, back when I was at Bending Spoons, we had a plugin that we fed it because we had the standard way to do all the styling, just like the same function, same way, etc. So basically, we did a custom plugin back then to Figma. So whenever the designer is done, we just download the code and we have all our designing functions and just copy paste it, and that's it. But you have to do it custom.
So I'll talk a bit about what we talked about a few years ago. So when I worked at a previous company, we had a lot of similar issues regarding design systems. We made an open source project called Prism that basically you can feed it Figma or a Zeppelin key, and then you give it some templates and it generates the code. And then the nice thing was, like, every time a designer would change something, he just pressed the button that fires CI process for iOS and Android, boom, the new colors, new symbols are everywhere. So there's no way to mess up in those apps. And that was something that was super monumental in getting a unified design and styling and language across that app when we had this huge rebuild a few years ago. I think systems like that automate the delivery of symbols everywhere are like a huge, huge deal. Yeah.
By the way, if any of you wants to add anything, you can go on the mic and be part of the discussion.
Come on stage.
Or on stage if you want. I mean, it's family, so you can go on.
Well, I think these things are very detailed, like little nitpicks of like how you implement and stuff. But I think, like I said before, I think in the end, the most crucial part is that you both fall in love with the product you make. You have to care for the product you make, and if you care enough, then you'll test it on the actual device. You'll use it multiple times a day, and that's where you iron out the little details. That's where the designer eye comes in to point out to the developer, hey, you might have missed this. And I think whether or not it's generated code or not the right color space, I think in the end it's all about what are you actually shipping. And that's also in the end what the user is actually using. The user doesn't care about the code or the board race being precisely that point. So.
Sorry, just want to say it's what I kind of meant about the designers and developers have to be friends. You have to always assume best intentions. Like, designers shouldn't come and think, oh, this developer is always coding coordinates. Sometimes we just don't have the attention to detail that the designer has. That's part of why we have different people working on it, because they have different specialties. And that's fine. So if we're all working towards the same goal and we assume best intentions from the other side, then it's easier to get stuff done.
Yeah, this goes into a more wider topic, probably off topic, but coding and making apps is not a competition. So you don't have to fight with designer or other coder or decide who's better or not. It's something that I've seen, but I mean, probably off topic. But yeah, it's related to the relationship between the designers and developers. I don't know if you.
I have one thing which is not quite relevant, but maybe somehow. So we're talking about UI, but I think like UX is also super important. And there were some times at like one of the places I worked, we decided to build this super cool feature, which we thought this is amazing, so smart. The UX would be like the UI looks great, and the user's going to use it. And then we ended up implementing that, and then we did the user test with it. Not single one of the users actually used the feature. They didn't even see what we had there. And so that also was an eye-opener for myself that, okay, something that you feel like it's actually going to be used and people are going to fall in love with it, they don't. And they don't even use it because it's not part of their main flow and they don't even care. So like user testing before actually doing the product is really important in a lot of cases.
Yeah, actually, like sites like user testing and .com and those websites where you can just shoot a prototype and let a bunch of different people you give them instructions and you say, okay, open it. What are you seeing? And then it helps you. Sometimes you can even do interviews. We do a lot of interviews before we actually go to implement. Like the cost of implementation is the highest cost you can pay. Anything you can do before to remove that cost or change what you're actually going to implement, it's worth it, even if it takes a bit longer.
User testing, by the way, can also mean just shipping it and letting it crash.
Yeah, that's implementation cost, though. That's a problem. Getting the prototype done takes maybe a designer time, a few hours, but actually implementing could take 2-3 months, for example. So, yeah.
I remember the video from before.
Do you think it would make sense to ship as fast as you can something that is not polished enough just to see if it works? Or should it be pixel perfect? What do you think?
I think it
Valeria,
depends on the product. If it's a new product, and like now when ChatGPT came out and everybody wanted to do an app for it, there you're offering like the premium is the functionality. So I would go with whatever I have, regardless of the perfect UI, regardless of everything, ship it, iterate on it, and so on and so forth. If you're going into an established market and the only difference you can have is your great UX or great UI, like a fitness app, for example, like there's thousands of them. So unless you're offering something really different, then I don't know how much sense it makes just to ship and iterate on it. So,
as long as you focus on the problem you're trying to solve, that should be the minimum, I think. I mean, as a designer background and now being a developer myself, I sometimes tend to overdo it a bit longer because I do want to have it nice and polished. But a good friend of mine, Jordi Bruin, for example, he ships apps like a machine. And often when I use his app, I'm like, hey, but did you think of that? Nope, but it's broken. And that's different, but that's great, because then he finds feedback early on, and that's how you iterate on the product. And of course, as an independent developer, you can move faster because you don't have processes in place or unit tests. And but it does help with getting the right feedback. And if it's not being picked up, if it's actually was just a problem for yourself that you're trying to solve, then you move on to the next step. And I think that's the most important with what you said with user testing as well. Just get it in the hands of people as fast as possible.
Well, I think it depends on what you need to test. If you need to test a new product, or I absolutely agree, MVPs all the way, just push it. But if you need to test the user experience and the usability, then it needs, I don't say pixel perfect, but really similar, because you would never know if the actual placement, size, and color of everything is accessible or usable.
Yeah, definitely. This depends on the scale of the product, for sure. Yeah.
I just wanted to give one example of where Ship It just worked. Like maybe some of you know Blue Sky, that was released lately to try and compete with Twitter. No one can say it's a pretty product. No one. It doesn't have the nicest UI, it's not polished, but it's working because it offers something different, right? So sometimes just hitting the ground fast, that's more important.
Please. What's your name? Okay, can we have some microphone for Alex, please? Sorry.
Does it not work?
Yeah.
Ah, no, perfect. I have a question because you mentioned pixel-perfect design. In my opinion, there is no more pixel-perfect design for apps because no designer provides me with 10 different designs for each iPhone. And if I give it to him to review it, he was like, it's 1 pixel more down. And I'm like, how do you want me to do it for the iPhone 14 and for the iPhone 14 Pro? I need different designs if you want it to be pixel perfect. What's your opinion about it?
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a big change. I mean, especially if you're also doing Android, right? It's not only about resolution, it's about pixel density. Everything is very different than it used to be. But there are some designers that are ultra and they're like, on iPhone 14, I designed for iPhone 14, it should look exactly like this. I take some Sketch plugin or Figma plugin and put it like with transparency on top of the phone and look if it's, that's terrible. Like it just kills velocity, and there's no way to really make a responsive, accessible app that works this way. But yeah, I think most people realize that it's not achievable or attainable, but it was the hype like 5 years ago trying to get a pixel perfect. I just don't think it's a worthy goal at all at this point. We want to make good products, not pixel perfect products.
There are too many pixels now.
Especially the designers don't design for each one. Like they'll design probably for a couple, and they're not going to do it for every single one.
And I think a lot of users don't actually care about if it's 16 pixels to the side, or if it's 12, or if it's 8. They don't really care about those things. So we, or the people who work in the industry, were much pickier when we were working with different apps. We're like, oh, they didn't do this or they did that. But like normal average users, depending on your audience, of course, they don't really care about those stuff. They might at the end feel like, okay, your app feels like clumsy because it's just like has different things happening in it, but they can't really point it out. So I think like pixel perfect then becomes a little bit meaningless, because then if you have a good enough product, they wouldn't notice the differences like average users.
Like if you have 8 pixel spacing, then the user says it feels crowded, but it doesn't feel exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if the user doesn't know what's causing it, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't get rid of the problem. Of course, I'm not saying we should design pixel perfect, but there's a big difference between a 24 pixel and an 8 pixel margin, for example. About
As long as it's consistent.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as it's consistent.
If it's consistently shit, it's still consistent.
If you went 12 on the right and 20 on the left, probably there's a problem.
It feels off.
I wanted to add something I was thinking while you were talking. One thing that we see a lot in agency work is shipping the application, starting from the same design, starting with the application, shipping the application for iOS and for Android, and there's somebody who takes both of them and say, here they are different. Like the final user is going to use your application with both Android and iOS side by side. Is it something that happens that you double check, or is probably something that is just like people have the passion for opening us bugs and because it happens a lot?
It's actually something that I battle with QA every time, because I actually don't care if Android and iOS are different, because they're two different platforms, and maybe something works better for iOS and something for Android. As long as the functionality is the same, the interactions, the user experience is the same, I don't care. And all the time I get QA that come to me and say, oh, look, these are different. What's the right one? Both of them are right. You know, every time, every single time they come.
No, okay. That's actually fine, because it's something that I will take this video to the next customer and I will tell him. We have a designer telling you that it's pointless.
Well, it's their money paying for it, so whatever they want.
Yeah, that's the problem with agency. They are paying for you, so you have to.
Yeah.
Basically, it is like the most ancient job in the world applied to coding. But it's fun, and you see a lot of different stuff. Like probably the most ancient job in the world, but I don't want to go off topic. So, do we have any? Okay, just let me double check in here. If you want to go on with this strange topic I pick, you can. I'm still having questions about elevator. I don't know why.
No, I mean, I don't know. We can just like with everything we said, I think the next response to designers when they complain is like, you can do it yourself. Just use SwiftUI, ChatGPT, and give me a better result.
It's a nice answer. I don't think I would be ever able to do that with my customer, but I will try. And yeah. Okay, no, you can go.
Okay.
What?
Can I?
Yeah,
go.
Try.
Okay, thank you. My name is Ezekiel. My question, it's a little bit outside of your current topic, but it's involving design and developers. For example, Hidde.
Close enough.
It's correct, the spelling. Sorry if not. It's a developer and designer, because he was a designer who became developer. But the opposite, for example, I am a developer to become a designer. Looks like a difficult, I don't know, very, very difficult path. And I would like to know, how can I make it more soft? My approach is use the default stuff from Apple and say, oh, it's a minimalist design. But in the deeply, I know, oh, it's just because I am bad at design. And I don't know what kind of literature or what kind of thing we need to study to be a more design approach developers. Not just, oh, okay, I can execute any design you made, but I want to be creative. I want to contribute, not just execute. That's it. Thank you. Thank you for this space.
Right. Yeah. So I just started designing also self-taught before I went to an actual course or school thing. The way I taught myself how to design is I grabbed software that I really liked the look of, like I really liked the design of. But at that point, I did not know why I liked it. And what I was trying to do is to try to learn and understand what makes me feel that I like this app or software, and try to recreate it and actually just plain copy it, not shipping the copy, of course, just trying to, by making great design, you start to learn and recognize patterns. You start to train your eye in seeing the correct spaces, seeing the right colors. Although I'm partly colorblind, so seeing the right colors is not a great thing. But like actively training your eye takes years, just like it took me years to learn how to develop. But it's all about continuously doing it and actively doing it, and try to understand why you like what you like.
I think I really agree with what you said, that being a designer turning developer is a bit simpler, because you need to learn how, but if you want to go the other way, you need to develop like taste. and develop a nice taste in design is so hard. Like you need to see a lot of things and try to learn from it, understand, like you said, the patterns. And what you said about like using the default components from iOS, that's always like a really hard thing to figure out. What's the fine line there? You don't want to be a totally vanilla app. You want your brand to have personality, but you also want the familiarity. So it's probably somewhere in the middle. We want to have sometimes custom components or semi-custom, meaning something that uses a UIKit component or a SwiftUI component, but wrapped in something of ours. And that's a good middle ground usually, because we get so much for free by using Apple components, especially on SwiftUI. You get support for iPad, and you get accessibility, and you get support for dynamic type. So going and trying to make everything from scratch ourselves could be nice, but it comes with a lot of work and a lot of unexpected corners that you can hit along the way.
And read a page of the HIG before going to bed.
Human interface guidelines apart. It changes every second, but yeah.
It used to be available on iBooks. I'm not sure if it's still the case, but it was great.
I don't know if iBooks is still available.
Oh yeah.
And another thing I want to add, it really depends on what your, let's say, passion is. Personally, like the first time I got into development was I always wanted to design my app. Like that was my thought process. And I'm a person, like, I really like aesthetics, design in general in life. So I was pushed towards, like, learning more about design. And I did it like you would learn anything. If you want to, the first time you, like, took up coding, if you thought about building a whole server, you would have probably quit coding immediately. What you did is you first learned the basic of any language that you picked up. You learned the data types and so on and so forth until you, like, got to where you got. So I would take the same approach with design if you have a passion, because if you just want to like get done with one app, then maybe I fully agree. Like you can just have like look at the competition, the default that Apple offers, and work with that. But if you have a passion for it, but like just start from the basics. Like the data types can be colors, typography, what they mean, understand them, and just try, fail, and repeat, and just like know that. Even designers themselves, like they had like to get where they got, it took them years and years and years, and a lot of times like they work in groups. Like even though like you do your design alone, but like it's not like you decide for the whole company. It's like collaborating with other people, throwing ideas. So throw yourself into meetups, into like follow people on Twitter that are into design, and you can get resources, learn, and go from there. So it really depends if you want to do it just to do it, or if you're like want to be passionate about it.
What you said about years and years, just want to say years is what people would consider failure, for example. Like, do you know when you look at your code from 6 months ago and say, I can't believe I wrote this piece of, you know what? Then designers look at designs they did 6 months ago. And so it's constant evolution. So when you work for years on code, on whatever, it's all creative work in a sense, right? Like you look back and you're like, I can't believe I did this thing 3 years ago. I'm doing much better work now. And as long as you keep feeling this way and are appreciative of that and of your personal progress, then yeah, everything is possible.
And I can share also a personal story about how I improved my design capabilities, which were 0 and probably now are around 1 in a scale of 1,000. But I married a designer. Exactly. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I married a designer who actually, as I said before, works with us and worked with us in the beginning, designing apps. And I learned a lot by hearing from her, telling me, what the fuck are you doing? Basically, something like that. It helps. Maybe not marry someone just to improve your design skills, but being friends or being in a good relation with somebody who can help you out, it's quite obvious.
Like a mentorship in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to find a mentor to give you.
Exactly.
We should make Tinder for designers.
Yeah, she didn't mentor me. She slapped me every time the margins weren't enough. But
my wife always says that she shaped me to who I am. So that's probably
yeah, she surely did. Yeah.
she shaped this podium as well.
She shaped the podium, yes, the design as well. Oh yeah, no. Actually, sorry, it's kind of late, and I'm still I didn't sleep at all this night. But we have a question from online. This is a funny one. Why does designers always use iOS layout to design in Figma? I can answer that because
Android
they
is
have
trash.
dynamic island. No, just kidding.
No, I mean, I don't know, just like, I mean, up until recently with, forgot the name, with Android, what was it? I forgot, Android Material Design. Like up until recently, Android wasn't big on anything really, not design, not security, not anything. Recently, it's been better, but the majority of designers, like having an iPhone is for the cool kids. Like it's always been like that. So like then you become a designer. I mean, that's my point of view. I'm not saying it is, but usually that's how it goes. Like it's just like Apple design historically has been better than Android design. So you do that, and with the capacity that you have, if you had to design for one platform, you would go for iOS, and even like. Especially when it's like apps that monetize from clients, like the majority of your clients are using Apple. They're not using Android. That's why like your whole focus is on iOS mainly, and then like you forget about the other child and just like give them the left.
Yeah, when you hit designer level 1000, you get knighted with an iPhone actually. It's a rite of passage.
We have people from Google, so I will not express myself about Android and what you just said, but that's...
I was about to say I don't 100% agree because, yeah, especially with material design, Android got not too bad. But I will say that what you said about like picking up a platform to go with first, it's a strategic decision. If you develop for the US, of course you're not going to ship Android for it, but if you ship for Europe or some third-party country, you're not going to ship iOS. They don't carry iOS devices. It's a business decision. It's not really a design decision. But yeah, I mean, before material design, Google didn't really have a comprehensive way of this is how you should design stuff. So designers didn't have a really good comprehensive thing to follow. But now there is a way, if like essentially just a personal preference. If you're a designer and you're carrying iOS device all day, then you're going to design iOS first. It might insult your other developers, so that's a shift.
I think I agree with the percentage of the users. So when most of your users are iOS based, then it kind of makes sense to do the iOS design. But then what we do is that for the parts that have like an Android specific design, then we don't try to like fit them into iOS, but then they will have a different Android design for that specific part. And a lot of it comes from Android engineers that they come and say, okay, this is very iOS focused. Android users don't use this. We should use this instead. And the designers are usually open to that and like making designs for them.
No, and especially I remember a few years ago there was this trend where you like designers / companies, agencies, whatever, they wanted to do 100% identical design on both platforms, where basically everything was designed for iOS and Android had to do everything custom just to look like iOS. Good thing that thing died. But again, yeah, as we said, like it's just probably a market decision.
I may follow up on that question. And why do designers always use an iPhone X family with the rounded borders, forgetting about that probably the compatibility goes back to iOS 12 with the iPhone 5S?
Because what's the percentage of people using iOS 12?
It's
exactly like for example, like in my company we're working on our SDK. It supports iOS 14 onward. We had a client ask for iOS 12 support, and it was based in Africa because as a business there in Africa they have older phones with older iOS devices. So it really depends on your analytics, and based on majority of the apps I worked on.
Yeah, I meant, but as long as you support them, even if you have 2 or 3 people, the design is going to look awful, probably, if it wasn't think for.
Yeah, but you wanna provide the best experience for the most of your users, and not a crappy experience to everyone just because you have 1% that can't support it. By the way, something that also again strategic or business decision, like Donnie talked about deprecating iOS versions. I remember that's also like every year we say, okay, if the users of Monday.com on iOS 13 or 14 are under 2% on this version, we just stop supporting it. It's not worth the time and money So it depends on the company. Of course, there are companies where it's worth supporting those older operating systems, but often it's not.
Yeah, but the problem is that the business wants older phones. The designers are designing it for larger screens. And guess who's the name on the ticket with the bug? I mean, it's...
Always the developer.
And I will answer them, oh, you only have 0.1% using that device, but they will reject my answer and will ask me to fix it. But the design wasn't usually happens, wasn't thought about smaller devices. What would you suggest? Convince the business to ditch older devices? Fuck them and whatever?
No, I mean, it doesn't make sense for anyone. It doesn't make sense for the business. It doesn't make sense for the developer. We're going to waste a lot of time just fixing one button, one layout, one whatever. I mean, like, if you want to use the app, just get a new phone.
A suboptimal experience for a few devices that have low usage.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
It's a compromise that a business has to take. I think that...
Oh, sorry.
Okay, just it's not a question. I would like just to add something in this topic. I am from Brazil. This idea of iPhone design is something American or European. The first iOS, there's apps that just exist on Android, for example, in Brazil or South America. If you go to Africa, it's even bigger. There's 90% of just Android. There's some interesting challenges in engineering, in this case, to optimize and its but just to put some in this discussion, there's a lot of designers who use Windows and Linux on South America, Brazil, Africa, and just to add something. I think someone mentioned it, third world countries. The correct term is developing countries because nobody chooses to be colonized and exploited by years. Just to be my 2 cents about that. Thank you.
Yeah, and there also, on top of that, if you move a little bit on the east and you end... I'm not saying anything inconvenient, I swear it. And you go into the Middle Eastern side, the UX takes another level, which is the right-to-left approach. I don't know if any of you has ever developed
Hebrew, Arabic.
Hebrew as well. Okay, I didn't know that. And it's untestable for a European person. Yes, there's the English pseudo language where you have everything flipped over, but it's one of the most hard, I think, things to test because you cannot read and you don't know the culture because you don't in that scenario. So it's another thing that it's really hard. Speaking about worldwide developing. Probably.
The culture is the hardest thing to optimize for in general. I think separate from right to left or
Yeah, not only in development.
Colors and everything.
One last question here. How important is accessibility, for example, color blindness in your design process? I think we are also having a talk about this. Color blindness.
Yeah. I think for the designer, accessibility stops at the point of color blindness a bit. There's a great tools to test designs, and that all designers should do it, just like developers should write documentation. But then at like things like voiceover and stuff, and even dynamic type, things like that is very, very difficult for a designer to anticipate on. So that's exactly an area where you have to sit next to a developer as a designer and see how things scales. And then if things get truncated, okay, how are we going to solve this? Are we going to change H stack to a V stack, for example, or are we going to, et cetera, et cetera. But the designer should take care of color blindness, but the rest should be side by side, I think.
And probably if you said
everything, always.
Yeah, ideally. Yeah.
And if you sit side by side talking about dynamic type and you're using collection views or cells with a fixed size, good luck with that. It's really a mess. So 6 and 5 o'clock. Beer? What do
Beer.
you think? Okay, so thank you for being with this strange round table, but it was really nice. I guess I enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. So I'm turning into Lucy for a moment, hopefully. So outside where you had lunch, we are setting up the aperitivo with beer, and the only thing left is to enjoy it and see you tomorrow for the second day of conference. Thank you all.